We often describe trauma by focusing on what actually took place: the shouting matches, the physical evidence, the visible breaking points. Yet there exists another form of trauma that is much quieter and, in many respects, far more difficult to recognize because it is defined not by what occurred, but by what was missing. This is known as childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. It is the lack of emotional attunement. It is the void where a parent's curiosity, validation, and comfort should have existed. Because it is an unseen wound, children raised in such environments often fail to notice that anything is wrong. They simply adapt. They build survival strategies that, from the outside, resemble personality traits or even admirable habits. You might be complimented for being the strong one, the independent one, or the easygoing one. But beneath that surface of confidence lies a set of behaviors created to compensate for a gap that was never supposed to exist. Consider, for instance, the pattern of extreme hyperindependence. On the surface, being someone who manages everything alone is often viewed as a mark of honor in our culture. You become the person who declines help, who solves complex issues at work without consulting IT, and who handles personal crises without ever reaching out to a friend. However, when we examine this more closely through a psychological perspective, we often uncover a child who learned very early that their environment was unresponsive. When a child seeks help or comfort and repeatedly encounters indifference, distraction, or irritation, the brain makes a drastic calculation. Asking for help becomes associated with rejection. Therefore, I must become my own source of everything. This is not merely independence. It is a trauma response. It is a defense mechanism rooted in the belief that others cannot be relied upon. When you refuse help as an adult, you are not just being efficient. You are shielding yourself from the painful disappointment of having a need that goes unmet. This naturally connects to another seemingly ordinary pattern: the difficulty in identifying what you feel, often described in psychology as a form of alexithymia. You may find yourself in situations where someone asks, "How do you feel about that?" and your mind goes completely blank. It is not that you are hiding your emotions, it is that you genuinely cannot access them. In a healthy upbringing, parents act as emotional mirrors. When a toddler cries, the parent says, "You're frustrated because that toy broke." This gives language to the internal experience and validates its existence. In a neglectful environment, that mirroring never occurs. The child's emotions are ignored or treated as an inconvenience. To cope, you learn to silence your inner world. You disconnect the link between bodily sensations and conscious awareness, because feeling those emotions serves no purpose when no one is there to help you process them. As an adult, this can appear as a flattened emotional life, where you feel as though you are observing everything through glass, wondering why others seem so much more connected to their joys and struggles than you are. Another subtle habit is the urge to over-explain or justify your actions, even when no one has questioned you. You might notice yourself giving a lengthy explanation for being slightly late or defending why you chose a particular product. This often originates from growing up in an environment where your needs and boundaries were not automatically respected. You learned that having preferences or making mistakes required justification. You had to demonstrate that your choices were logical and beyond criticism to avoid being dismissed or judged. In essence, you are preemptively defending yourself against a critical presence from your past. You do not feel entitled to simply exist or make decisions without providing a detailed explanation for why they are acceptable. Then there is the reflex to apologize. This is the habit of saying, "I'm sorry" for things that are not your responsibility, or even for simply taking up space. You apologize when someone bumps into you, when you ask a question, or when your home is not perfectly tidy. This pattern reflects a deeply internalized sense of being a burden. If you grew up feeling like your presence was inconvenient to your parents, perhaps they were constantly overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or uninterested, you learned to minimize yourself. You discovered that the safest way to exist was to be as unobtrusive and low demand as possible. The apology becomes a subtle message. I'm sorry for needing space. I'm sorry for being here. It is the spoken expression of a child who was taught that their needs came second to the comfort of others. This leads into another nuanced behavior known as the social chameleon effect. You may notice that you are exceptionally skilled at reading social dynamics. You can detect shifts in mood before others even recognize them. You adjust your personality, tone, and opinions to match those around you. On the surface, this appears to be emotional intelligence or strong social skills. But for those who experienced emotional neglect, this is often a hyper-vigilant survival strategy. Because your caregivers did not provide emotional consistency, you became highly attuned to their moods to maintain safety or to identify the right moment to ask for something. You became reflective because you were not allowed to form a stable sense of self. As an adult, this can leave you feeling like a different person depending on your company, raising a persistent question: who am I when I am alone? This absence of a core identity stems directly from not having your individuality acknowledged during your formative years. Another related pattern is the tendency to second-guess yourself. This involves an internal dialogue that questions every decision, no matter how minor. Should I buy this? Did I sound foolish? Do people genuinely like me? When a child's experiences are consistently dismissed or denied, they lose trust in their own perception. If you express sadness and were told you were wrong or ignored, you learn that your internal signals were unreliable. Over time, you stopped trusting your instincts and began seeking external validation to determine what is real. This creates a lifelong pattern of uncertainty and dependence on reassurance. We also see this dynamic in relationships, particularly in the caregiver role. You may be the person everyone turns to for support, the listener, the fixer, the one who helps others while neglecting your own needs. Although this may seem admirable, it often serves as a way to avoid vulnerability. In childhood, you may have learned that being useful was the only way to receive positive attention. Perhaps you cared for siblings or supported a parent emotionally. Your sense of worth became tied to what you could do for others rather than who you are. This leads to imbalanced relationships where you give endlessly but struggle to receive. Accepting help feels uncomfortable, even unsafe. It may feel like a hidden obligation or a vulnerability you cannot afford. As a result, you may find yourself in one-sided relationships. You become the reliable one, the source of support, but when you face difficulties, you withdraw. You do not reach out because, at a deep level, you believe that without being useful, you are a burden. This is the trap of service-based worth. Another manifestation is extreme hyper-independence. You may take pride in handling everything alone: finances, repairs, emotional struggles, and even health issues without seeking help. Society often praises this as strength, but psychologically, it can reflect a counter-dependency response. If you were neglected, you learned that those meant to care for you were unavailable or unreliable. Asking for help led to disappointment or silence. To protect yourself, you eliminated the need to ask altogether. Your independence became a protective barrier. This barrier serves a purpose. If I do not depend on anyone, I cannot be hurt. But it comes at a cost. It creates isolation. By hiding your vulnerabilities, you also prevent genuine connection. True closeness requires the willingness to rely on others. Chronic indecisiveness is another common pattern. You may struggle to choose even simple things like what to eat or watch. This is not merely about being flexible. For a neglected child, having preferences could lead to dismissal or ridicule. Over time, you learn to suppress your desires and instead look to others for direction. This disconnect from your own instincts makes decision-making difficult. When asked what you want, Your mind may go blank because your preferences feel inaccessible. You scan your environment for the right answer, prioritizing harmony over authenticity. This stems from a belief that your desires are unimportant. Perhaps one of the most painful patterns is the persistent apology reflex. You apologize for existing, for asking questions, for minor inconveniences. This reflects a deep sense of guilt about your presence. If you grew up feeling unseen or unheard, you may carry the belief that you are inherently in the way. Apologizing becomes a protective act, an attempt to prevent rejection. It is a way of shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. Similarly, many individuals who experience neglect avoid confrontation altogether. You may think of yourself as easygoing, but in reality, you fear disagreement. In your early environment, conflict may have led to emotional withdrawal. To maintain connection, you learn to suppress your needs and prioritize peace at your own expense. For you, silence does not feel calm. It feels like abandonment. So where does this leave you? If you recognize these patterns, hyperindependence, emotional disconnection, constant apologizing, it is important to understand that nothing is inherently wrong with you. Your mind adapted to survive. It developed these behaviors in response to an environment where your needs were not met, but your circumstances have changed. You are no longer that child. The strategies that once protected you may now feel heavy and restrictive. They may even prevent you from experiencing the connection you long for. Healing is not about fixing something broken. It is about nurturing the parts of yourself that were neglected. It begins with small, subtle changes. Expressing a preference, pausing before apologizing, or allowing someone to help you are all meaningful steps. These behaviors once served as your armor, and they helped you endure, but you no longer need to carry them all the time. You are allowed to be seen, to have needs, and to rely on others. The right people will not view your needs as burdens. They will see them as opportunities to care for you. You were never too much, and you were never insufficient. You were simply a child who needed to be acknowledged. And now it is time for you to begin acknowledging yourself. If you see yourself in this video, remember this: you are not alone. Share in the comments. I'd really like to hear your story. If today's video gave you value, hit like and share it with someone who might also be battling an overly sensitive mind. Your understanding today could totally change someone's day. Thank you for staying with me until the end.